Condemned killer Robert Harris. His stay is upheld by the Supreme Court. A bitter prison riot in Great Britain. Many of the inmates still won't give up. A big oil spill on the Allegheny River and Pittsburgh's water supply is threatened.
NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. High drama tonight on death row. Robert Alton Harris was originally scheduled to die in the California gas chamber tomorrow morning. That would be the first execution in that state in 23 years. Then a federal appeals court stayed the execution, and tonight the U.S. Supreme Court voted 6-3 to uphold the stay. More from NBC's Don Oliver.
Lawyers for Harris contend the man who murdered 2 teenagers in 1978 did not have a proper psychiatric evaluation, that he would not have been given the death sentence had jurors known his brain might have been damaged because his mother drank heavily while pregnant and his father beat him. The California Attorney General called the delay an abuse of the appeals process.
Now, it's not surprising that a defense team in this posture would try that tactic. It is surprising that any court would permit it.
Relatives of one of the murder victims say the new appeal on Harris's behalf is a sham.
We are sick and tired of hearing about criminals' rights. Harris has had more than his day in court.
I said I would not.
But Harris's brother believes the condemned man is not being treated with respect by society.
He was remorseful for everything he's done and everything.
There were only a few protesters outside the gates of San Quentin today, maintaining a vigil against the death penalty, which began a month ago. The fact that Harris might become the first man in 23 years to be executed in California has generated interest worldwide. The courtyard at the prison was filled today with television transmission vehicles waiting to send the word.
All inmates at San Quentin are placed on a lockdown status.
During the day, Harris remained in a special cell on death row under constant guard. Now that the stay of execution has been upheld, he will be moved back to his regular cell to await further hearings by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. That is expected to take weeks. Don Oliver, NBC News, Los Angeles.
Later here in tonight's program, we begin a series of reports on the death penalty in America. Tonight, is it worth it? Legally, politically, economically. In Great Britain tonight, a prison riot that won't end. It's beginning to look like something out of Charles Dickens at the Strangeways prison in Manchester, northwest of London. There are unconfirmed reports of 12 dead inmates, and NBC's Tom Pettit tells us now the battle goes on.
Half of this Victorian-era prison is still controlled by inmates tonight, more than 36 hours after the revolt began. The authorities have been waging a war of nerves, low-level overflights, trying to force the mutinous prisoners to give themselves up. Most of the 1,600 prisoners surrendered earlier. But so far, about 120 men are holding out. The police and prison guards have made occasional shows of force. The press has not been allowed inside. Strangeways prison is a classic of overcrowding. It had operated at almost double its planned capacity. Many cells meant for one held 3 prisoners. So when the riot erupted Sunday morning, it was no great surprise. Labor Party spokesman Roy Hattersley.
If we treat men like animals, we ought not to be surprised that they behave like animals.
For some prisoners, this was a cry for help. For others, it was simple rage. The number of injured has been estimated at 49, police and prisoners. The rebels say there has been no killing. But as the mutiny goes on tonight, there is ghoulish speculation about how many of the hardcore resistors are still alive. As for rumors and reports of prisoners killing other prisoners, we simply do not know. Tom Pettit, NBC News, London.
Back in this country, Republican National Chairman Lee Atwater is in a New York hospital tonight for what is called aggressive radiation treatment for a brain tumor. Doctors for the 39-year-old political strategist said the tumor is much more serious than the original diagnosis indicated. President Bush told Cincinnati Republicans today that he is confident that Atwater will overcome this. Ryan White, the Indiana teenager who has become such a public figure as a result of his courageous battle against AIDS, is hospitalized in critical condition tonight. White, who is now 18, contracted the deadly disease from a blood transfusion during treatment for hemophilia. He fought to be readmitted to his public school. It was the first of many cases like that in the country. Also coming up here tonight on NBC Nightly News, Iraq's Saddam Hussein with a wild new threat. Mike Jensen in Atlantic City on the opening day of the Taj Mahal. Donald Trump is betting it will make him even richer, while Atlantic City remains the poor stepsister. For the first time today, President Saddam Hussein of Iraq admitted that his country does have advanced chemical weapons, and he threatened to use them against Israel. Saddam Hussein's threat came less than a week after Iraq was accused of trying to smuggle American-made nuclear weapon triggers through London. He said Iraq didn't need a nuclear bomb, it had chemical weapons, and he warned that if Israel tries again to attack an Iraqi nuclear reactor as it did 9 years ago, Iraq would wipe out half of Israel with those chemical weapons. For its part, Israel said it has no aggressive intentions. However, it also said it has proven in the past that it is able to defend itself and it will not be blackmailed by threats like Saddam Hussein's. The U.S. State Department called the Iraqi threat inflammatory, irresponsible, and outrageous. In Lithuania, it was President Landsbergis' move today in what has been called a chess game with Mikhail Gorbachev. 2 days ago, Gorbachev warned that if Lithuania refuses to back down from its declaration of independence, there could be, quote, grave consequences. Today, Landsbergis did back down a bit. NBC's Bob Abernathy in Moscow.
Lithuania's leaders insist their declaration of independence is legal, but in a gently worded response to the Kremlin, President Landsbergis told President Gorbachev he's willing to discuss the declaration's legal status. Urging Parliament to take account of Gorbachev's problems, Landsbergis sent a telegram to the Soviet leader asking for talks with Moscow at any level and assuring Gorbachev Lithuania has no desire to harm the USSR or your policy of perestroika. While Parliament met inside, demonstrators outside insisted there be no annulment of last month's Declaration of Independence as Gorbachev had demanded. Meanwhile, a delegation left for Moscow to try to talk to Kremlin leaders. Also today, a telegram blitz. Lithuanians crowding the post office to tell President Gorbachev they want Lithuania free and Soviet troops out.
We demand to stop Tyrol occupation armed over Lithuania.
More Soviet armored vehicles and troops arrived in Lithuania over the weekend, helping to tighten Moscow's anti-independence pressure. But the Lithuanian independence movement is as non-violent as it is determined. And in the face of Soviet threats and troops, and despite President Gorbachev's demands, these people today just sang. Bob Abernathy, NBC News, Moscow.
One part of the world where violence continues tonight, South Africa's Natal province, where fighting between rival black factions now has left more than 50 people dead in less than a week. Today, South Africa's government ordered in army and police reinforcements while Nelson Mandela was in that region calling for peace. NBC's Robin Lloyd.
Mandela's mission was to urge black leaders to stop factional fighting. But his first call today was to white cabinet officials to get talks with the government back on track. He said he would meet this week with President F.W. de Klerk to discuss the African National Congress's decision to postpone formal talks with the government.
I'm certainly looking forward to see the meeting between myself and the state president.
But in a hardline address to Parliament, de Klerk announced a major crackdown on political unrest. He said army troops would be deployed across the country and detentions would increase. He criticized the ANC for sending the wrong signal.
It is difficult to understand why an organization saying it is interested in peace refuses to come and talk about that very issue.
But for Mandela and the ANC, the issue is police violence. They were outraged when police fired live ammunition last week, killing at least 11, wounding more than 100. All weekend, Mandela explained the suspension of talks.
I have no doubt that if the police opened fire and killed just one white man, the whole of white South Africa would scream at the top of their voices.
Many whites today were critical of Mandela's decision to postpone talks. But in the still tense township of Sebokeng, Mandela had gained even more respect. Mandela would like to see talks between the ANC and the government rescheduled as soon as possible. But first, de Klerk will have to promise that increasing police violence against blacks will stop. Robin Lloyd, NBC News, Sebokeng, South Africa.
Another kind of turbulence today, the Tokyo Stock Exchange suffering its second worst fall in history. The key Japanese stock index was down almost 7% today, continuing a decline that began early this year. The immediate reason? Speculation that major life insurance companies plan to shift money out of Japan's stock market. Today's drop helped push the U.S. dollar to a new 3-year high against the yen. In Washington, meanwhile, Japanese and American negotiators met today in an effort to head off a trade war. In addition, 2 high-level Japanese emissaries held separate, unscheduled talks with Secretary of State Baker, and some progress was reported on easing Japanese trade restrictions. This morning, Japan's Prime Minister Kaifu telephoned President Bush. The president said the conversation was very fruitful, but he added, we'll have to wait and see.
A wipe.
A water crisis in greater Pittsburgh tonight. Water supplies for more than 1 million people in that area were threatened today by an oil spill. About 75,000 gallons of gasoline, kerosene, and heating oil spilled into the Allegheny River late Friday when a 10-inch pipeline broke near Freeport. More from NBC's Dan Molina tonight.
The slick has now polluted 31 miles of the Allegheny River. At least 10 communities have stopped pumping water from the river. Those with low reserves are trucking it in.
It's now just reached the largest supplier on the Allegheny River, which is the city of Pittsburgh. However, they're still drawing water, have a significant reserve capacity from 3 to 5 days.
Harrison Township, upstream from Pittsburgh, was hit early and hard. This is its 10 million gallon reservoir. This is nearby Tarentum. Here, the fire department is easing the burden by pumping about 3/4 of the normal supply out of the local trout stream.
You know, it was just one of those fluke things that we thought of spur of the moment, said, hey, the creek's not polluted, you know, let's go there for water.
At the site of the original break, the pipeline is still leaking. That means that people who live along the length of the slick don't know how long they'll have to put up with this, stocking up water from whatever supplies are available. Families are learning new coping skills.
You don't know how much to use because you know how much water we're going to be able to get.
For many thousands, it's a time for resourcefulness and much patience.
No water, hon. No water.
Dan Molina, NBC News, Pittsburgh.
And after 2 months of bitter controversy, the American Heart Association has decided to pull the plug on its Heart Guide food labeling program. The idea was to endorse foods low in sodium and fat, but the program itself failed to win approval from federal regulators.
Apply.
The death penalty in America. Tonight we begin a 3-part report on capital punishment in this country. It seems to be more popular with voters than ever before, but does it work? Does it take too long to execute criminals? Does it cost too much? And does it deter others from crime? NBC's Bill Schuckner.
He calls himself Sam Jones. A licensed electrician, he is the executioner for the state of Louisiana.
A lot of them say they believe in the death penalty, but they don't think they could throw the switch.
How about you?
Oh, I can throw it. I've thrown it 18 times.
Someday, Abdul al-Malik may meet Sam Jones. Malik took his name after he arrived on Louisiana's death row in 1985, convicted of killing a cop.
Each time a man is taken to the death house, it takes something from me. And I'm wondering if I would have the strength to go peacefully as most of them have gone.
Across the country, about 2,300 inmates are waiting for the executioner. The death penalty is in force in 36 states, a punishment the public says it wants.
The procedure, which consists of 2,000 volts for 10 seconds, 500 volts for 20
After 14 years, what has the public gotten? A penalty whose value as a deterrent is uncertain, a penalty that each year adds 200 more inmates to death row than it removes, a penalty so bogged down that even advocates like New Orleans District Attorney Harry Connick are unhappy.
We really don't have the death penalty anymore.
What do we have?
We have a series of court decisions which are going to delay the execution of people who have been convicted and sentenced to death.
What happened? The appeals process has grown in ways few could imagine. Lives are at stake, so it is exhaustive. The system operates unevenly, so there is a lot to review. Consider the case of Glenn Ford, on death row 5 years. Convicted of a burglary murder by an all-white jury on the basis of circumstantial evidence, he turned down a deal of life in prison. He said he hadn't done it. Ford couldn't pay a lawyer. The court appointed Paul Alexander, a respected civil lawyer who had never tried a criminal case.
If Glenn Ford were to have the best of all possible worlds, he would have had a distinguished, experienced criminal defense attorney. How would you describe yourself? A good lawyer, a good generalist, but certainly not an experienced criminal defense attorney.
Did Glenn Ford have an even chance? Appeals courts must decide. And it is appeals like his that are the latest threat to the death penalty. They are slow, 6 years on average, expensive, often $1 million, sometimes more expensive than life in prison. A New York study projected costs of $1.6 million for an execution, $600,000 for a life term. Criminal justice consultant Bob Spangenberg predicts some states may drop the death penalty because of money.
It may come down to issues like health, highways, other forms of public safety, and the death penalty.
We're going to give them the death penalty.
But right now, the death penalty is riding high. Candidates are running on it. Congress is considering limiting appeals, even though some fear it will deny inmates a full chance. Analysts say the death penalty is popular because people want to take a hard shot at violent crime. So, despite the fact that it is costly, slow, and unproven as a deterrent, most Americans say capital punishment is just punishment. Vernon and Elizabeth Harvey are among them. Their daughter Faith was murdered in 1980. Vernon Harvey went to the execution.
A lot of people say, you sink to his level. He kills, you kill.
He had a judge, he had a juror, he had a lot of appeals repeatedly for many years. Where was that for Faith? Yeah.
Helen Prejean, a nun, is a friend of the Harveys who has also seen executions. She counsels victims' families as well as men on death row.
There's an alternative to the state killing people. The alternative is that you give up your freedom and that you're put in prison, but we don't lower ourselves to their level by repeating their crime and repeating their violence.
Polls show almost 80% of Americans support capital punishment. But when those who favor capital punishment are asked if life without parole is an acceptable substitute, about 30% of them say yes. It seems the jury is still out.
Do we really want it? If we want it, then let's get on with it. And if we don't, let's say we don't.
While the debate continues, 2,300 people are in line to die, and another 300 are sentenced to join them each year. Bill Schechner, NBC News, Angola, Louisiana.
Tomorrow night, some people who came face to face with the hardest questions about the death penalty, members of a jury. Donald Trump today opened the doors to his billion-dollar gamble, his new Atlantic City casino, the Taj Mahal. For the Donald, as his estranged wife Ivana calls him, if this one pays off, he'll be worth a lot of extra zeros. But NBC's Mike Jensen tells us what's good for the Donald isn't necessarily a bonus for Atlantic City.
Opening day at what Donald Trump, in typical understatement, is calling the eighth wonder of the world, the Trump Taj Mahal. 3,000 slot machines, 160 gaming tables, a casino filled with people who came hoping for a glimpse of the Donald. With all the publicity that you have had about the pending divorce and about your private life, what has that done to your effectiveness as a businessman?
Look, divorce is a bad thing, and I don't like divorce, and it's nothing anybody likes going through. But you see what's happened here today. I mean, I just wonder, without all of that, how many of these people would be here.
The gamblers here are surrounded by opulence. $14 million worth of Austrian crystal chandeliers. $4 million in uniforms and costumes for entertainers in the lobby and for the doormen outside. But the glitter of the Atlantic City casinos begins and ends at the boardwalk. 2 blocks away, slums.
We still have the tale of two cities here. In Atlantic City, we have the oasis and the charisma, and then we still have the abject poverty of the desert.
Boarded up buildings, crime, prostitution, crooked politicians, and poor people.
The casinos don't put any money into the city.
So what do they do with all the money?
What the casinos are doing is fighting over the money. These men are transporting gamblers to the far end of the boardwalk, to the Taj Mahal, away from the other casinos, including Trump Plaza and Trump Castle. Ray Beaudry and his friends decided to take their business to the Taj Mahal.
I usually do my gambling at the Trump World once a year. And today we're going to try the Taj Mahal and see what it's like.
Donald Trump has to take in $1 million a day at the Taj Mahal just to break even. He's convinced the casino can make it. But the bigger question is, can Atlantic City make it? Mike Jensen, NBC News, Atlantic City.
That's Nightly News for this Monday night. I'm Tom Brokaw. I'll be off tomorrow night, and Jane Pauley will be here. I'll see you again on Wednesday.